Welcome to the Foreign Policy Week in Review with Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. This is a new segment we're looking to do at the end of each week to let Daniel update us on what he considers to be the most important foreign policy news of the past week. So welcome, Daniel. It's really good to talk to you again.
Thanks so much, Jay. It's great to be back with you.
Really good to hear from you again. And I go to the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, and I notice one of the most startling headlines that I see there: former Bush National Security Advisor suggests that we start World War III with Russia. Wow, I mean, I can't believe that anybody would have put that, would have said it exactly like that. But Stephen Hadley is suggesting that we start to provide some pretty devastating weapons, I guess, to the Ukraine, to the people that our neocons are supporting there in the Ukraine. Is that the issue here?
It is indeed, Jay. And this is the title is somewhat hyperbolic, but the point that Hadley made at the Aspen Institute conference last week, he said, if I was in my old job, I'd be providing lethal assistance to Ukraine. He says, yeah, we could do it through the CIA. I suspect he means continue to do it through the CIA. But
yeah, as if we're not already, huh?
Yeah. We could do it through the CIA, but hey, why don't we send Putin a message and just do it overtly? So it's clear with what he's trying to say that that he wants to send a message to Putin has very little to do with Ukraine anyway. And as you know, this is a civil war that broke out in April between the people in eastern Ukraine who want to break away from the government in the West. If you remember back in February, the government in the West was overthrown with the assistance of the U.S. administration, with Obama and with Victoria Nuland and all these guys in the State Department. And the people in the East didn't want to go along with it, so they decided to break away. And Kiev, the West government, then began bombing and lobbing mortars into towns in Donetsk and Lugansk. And now I think it's over 4,000 people have been killed, and probably most of them are civilians in East Ukraine. So this is Hadley saying, hey, we need to ramp this thing up. As your listeners know, there was a ceasefire in September that was agreed in Minsk in Belarus, which has not really been as much of a ceasefire. There have been 1,000 people killed since the ceasefire.
Wow.
But that's not much reported. But I think the U.S. is chomping at the bit for this thing to be over. They don't want this to be a frozen crisis. They want to crush the uprising in eastern Ukraine, as if it really matters to us either way, who rules these areas. But I think what I think we're seeing here, Jay, is some messaging going on, and I think people like Hadley are being trotted out. And interestingly enough, just before Vice President Biden went to Ukraine, this is Hadley mouthing off on how we need to send lethal aid, and this is not something that has been proven. But there was an article in the weekend edition of Counterpunch. This hacking group, Cyber Bearcoot, claims to have hacked a mobile device of one of the American diplomats accompanying Biden this past week to Ukraine. And apparently it had some detailed information about what the Western Ukrainians are asking for, and what the U.S. is considering or willing to or will commit to sending them. And if you read the list, and I'm saying that this is not verified, but if you look at what they're asking for, it's pretty scary. You're talking about 70,000 mortar shells, almost 1,000 grenade launchers, anti-aircraft missiles, which is strange because the rebels in the East don't have aircraft. So you can scratch your head about that. But it's clear, I think, to sum up, that the U.S. is looking toward moving forward and reigniting this conflict in the East.
Well, maybe if they want the anti-aircraft missiles, maybe they're hoping that Mr. Putin's plane strays close by, and they can take a shot at him.
Yeah, that could well be the case. Certainly, some people believe that was the real purpose in shooting down this Malaysian airliner. They expected it was Putin's plane. We'll never know. We can speculate, but
most Americans are saying, "Well, what's with this guy Putin? Why doesn't he just Why doesn't he just behave himself? Why doesn't he just stop sending troops into the Ukraine? Why doesn't he stop waging war against America? That's what most people think here.
Yeah, he's the aggressor. He's clearly unhinged. He's dangerous. He's worse than Hitler and Stalin combined. A lot of that may well be true. He's a politician. But what's funny? I did a piece on General Philip Breedlove, who is the Supreme Allied Commander for Europe in NATO. He's an American general, and he has been announcing for the past week yet another Russian invasion of Ukraine. And as I pointed out in this article I wrote, this makes 36 Russian invasions of Ukraine that has been claimed by NATO and by the Western media and by the Ukrainian media. 36 invasions, yet not a single photograph, a single provable photograph of Russian military equipment going into Ukraine. So, as I kind of jokingly pointed out in the piece, this must be the most stealth army in history. It's virtually invisible. But yet, as you point out, Jay, I think in jest, and partly in jest, it's true. The U.S. media reports these things as gospel. They're not questioning these claims. I'm ready to believe they're true. But we've all lived through 2003 and the U.S. invasion of Iraq, which was based on lies.
Yeah.
So I'm ready to believe them, but they're going to have to give me a little bit more than what they gave us before. They have to give us a little more than just take our word for it.
Yeah, a little evidence. Well, one wonders why it should even matter to us that much, what goes on in the Ukraine. Why should it matter as long as, why not just let the people alone? Why not just let things work out the way they were? They did have an election in the Ukraine. We didn't like the results, so we decided that we didn't like the results, so we decided we would stage a coup or help the locals stage a coup. So I don't. It's just so inconsistent with what we claim to be in America. It seems to me, Daniel.
Yeah, well, you make a great point, Jay, because this is the whole issue of defining what is the U.S. national interest.
Yeah.
The interventionists and the neocons and the so-called humanitarians, they have such a broad concept of what it means to be in the national interest that it means the U.S. has got to intervene anywhere and everywhere constantly whenever there's trouble, even if it doesn't relate to us. People claim that this is in the vital interest of the United States. Who is in charge in Donetsk?
Yeah.
I'm sure if you ask even the so-called experts and you gave them a blank map, I would bet they would have a difficult time finding it on the map. So
yeah.
It's this overly broad view of which is our vital national interest, and it's absolutely, as your listeners well know, Jay, it's absolutely bankrupting this country. And you want to talk about a threat to our national security? How about a country whose currency has completely tanked, and whose economy is in the toilet because of all this intervention? I think that's a real security threat.
Oh, absolutely. And one thing that I think it's very interesting. Russia has no debt to speak of compared to the United States. Its debt to GDP is minuscule. And, of course, at the present time, the U.S. dollar is looking stronger because it's the least bad of all the Western currencies. But in the meantime, there's also some very interesting things going on a currency front with the BRIC countries looking to establish their own trading system and their own banking system to try to protect themselves against the United States and the NATO allies who are really trying to enforce sanctions against Russia. So what are they supposed to do? We cut off their ability to trade in dollars. So what they're really doing, both China and Russia, is starting to trade more and more in non-dollars. It's striking to me that China, for example, has all of these arrangements with countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, some of our closest allies, to trade not in U.S. dollars but between their own currencies, Canadian dollars and Chinese currencies. The Russians the same way with Iranians and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I think you make a very good point, Daniel, that economics, if you're weak economically, I think most sort of empires decay from within. I've heard it said in the past, and I think we're doing a good job of that, and part of it is this overreach that seems to be what you're talking about all the time. I want to ask you this, General Breedlove. Then, what's he suggesting? More money? Is that what he's suggesting? More aid to Ukraine, to the Ukraine military, just in form, I suppose, of weapons and money, huh?
Well, what I kind of pointed out in the article, I guess in a slightly ironic or maybe even sarcastic way, is that Breedlove announced a large increase of U.S. assistance to Ukraine, military assistance, though they claim non-lethal. So they've offered an enormous amount of military assistance to Ukraine. NATO is actually keeping its tanks on Russia's border. There are a bunch of tanks that went in to Poland and Lithuania over the summer for exercises. They're going to actually keep them there, which has not happened before. And yet, in Breedlove's recent speech, he talked about he denounced Russia's militarization of the situation. So it's quite funny. Here's the U.S. militarizing at every turn, sending in military equipment, moving tanks right up to the border with Russia. Yet when Russia moves troops within its own territory, the U.S. screams militarization, militarization. It's almost comical.
Yeah, well, this is the reason that I want to have you on here, Daniel, because this is, most people listen to the news, they look at the headlines as the mainstream press puts them out, and basically people tend to believe the headlines. They tend to believe what they're told. And so it is Putin the aggressor, not us. We're not doing anything wrong. We're the good guys. They're the bad guys. And here you're telling us that all we hear about are the tanks, the troops, and the weapons that are put on the Ukrainian border by Putin. We don't hear anything about the American weapons that are being put on the border. So that's why I think it's so important to have you on the show to talk about these kind of details, Daniel. We're also looking at Obama's now stepping up again, becoming more and more aggressive, whereas he was supposed to be, I think the guy even won a Nobel Prize for Peace. He was supposed to be winding things down in Iraq. He's starting to stir things up again there, and in Afghanistan likewise, he's using stealth again. I guess more stealth equipment to try to control things there. How successful has Obama's stealth programs been? He's been using them more than anybody else, far more than his predecessor.
Yeah, he does, and he uses. I think the 500th drone strike took place within this past week, and
500 drone strikes. Now we're talking about killer strikes in which they take out people that they think might be a problem.
And the civilian to target ratio is very high, so you're taking out a lot of civilians. I think I saw, and I shouldn't say this because I don't have the number in front of me, but I think they said 12 civilians for every high value target. So
wow,
that's not good numbers. But
well, you would tend to think that might sort of make people a little bit angry.
Certainly, people are going to be angry over there, and this is the thing that you're making reference to is the fact that President Obama announced that for 2015, American troops in Afghanistan actually would have a combat role, contrary to what he promised earlier on. He said that there'll be a very small. There's not, I think, 9,800 troops there right now. They would be cut in half by mid-year, and none of them would have a combat role. But what he announced, he didn't announce. What he privately authorized was a combat role for these troops. And my suspicion is that this 9,800 will not be drawn down by half. And the reason for this is that the Pentagon is terrified of happening in Afghanistan what's happened in Iraq, which is that as soon as the U.S. leaves, because they've created such chaos, they've undermined every part of society, from the infrastructure to social structures to family structures to governmental structures. In both countries, once they leave, once the pure force of occupation is gone, then chaos will reign, and you'll have another ISIS-like takeover. You'll have the Taliban taking over in Afghanistan. So the president has quietly ordered the military to continue fighting Afghanistan rather than drawing down.
Yeah. Well, that to me is the one issue that I always had a little bit of a problem with Ron Paul's view of what we should do. Just bring the troops home. And it seems to me, though, Daniel, that if I believe that that's what we should do. I believe we should pull back. But empires don't do that until they're forced to, generally speaking. And one of the reasons I believe they don't do that until they're forced to is because of the very thing you just said. We create destruction and chaos and destroy the infrastructure and the social structure and everything of these countries by being in there. And then if we were to pull back, there's a vacuum, and then all hell breaks loose, right?
Yeah, but his argument is the exact same argument he made against the bailouts when the 2008 crash came.
Sure.
He said these things, these bad investments, this malinvestment, it's all going to have to work its way out one way or the other. And
you're right.
You can bail it out, you can prop it up, you can do all these TARP things, but you're only delaying the inevitable. And so it really is the same argument he's making for just pull out is the argument for just don't bail out. It's
right.
The same thing. The idea that intervention will create new crises that demand more interventions. Ultimately, however, things will revert to the status quo ante in some form or another. Things will work themselves out in some form or other, no matter what you do.
Right, but he would also argue that the more we bailed people out, the bigger the ultimate crisis will be. The greater the suffering will be before some normalcy is reached again.
Exactly, Jay. You're absolutely right.
And so what we have now, as we just talked about a few minutes ago, we have this guy Stephen Hadley suggesting that we put nuclear weapons or some kind of very dangerous weapons in the hands of the Ukrainians. As if that was going to make things better. And I have to ask you, isn't that going to force Putin's hand to do something drastic if we just keep pushing him?
Well, it's always an easy argument to make, but what if the shoe were on the other foot and a power that we viewed as hostile started arming in a rebellion in Mexico that was aimed toward taking back Texas or something of that nature?
Right.
If something so drastic is happening on our border, obviously there is some concern. I mean, the U.S. for how many hundreds of years, the Monroe Doctrine, what have you, the Western Hemisphere has been considered our sphere of influence. So anywhere in that area where there's unrest, the U.S. feels it's obliged or allowed to intervene. So you're talking about right next door to Russia. So of course, and it's also and I'm not a huge fan of international law and international organizations. However, there is a mutual benefit in some ways to being part of these, and it is against the UN Charter and it is against international law to provide weapons to one side in a war zone, and that's exactly the case in Ukraine. So you could point out the hypocrisy of the U.S. Citing international law whenever it's convenient, but flouting it whenever it wishes. It's as you said earlier, Jay, one of the many reasons why the rest of the world is so irritated with the U.S.
Yeah, we don't play by the rules that we help to establish, essentially, and only when it benefits us, and when we turn around and blame other people for not doing that. Well, one more thing I'd like to ask you about, Daniel, before we conclude our discussion this week, and that is the issue of the dismissal of Secretary of Defense Hagel. What's going on there, and what's underlying that conflict? Apparently, he never really hit it off that well with the rest of the administration.
Yeah, well, he did not hit it off very well with Obama's national security team. I'm talking about Susan Rice and the people around her, Samantha Power, and these are the liberal humanitarian interventionist types who are, the sort of the leftish counterpart to the neocons. And Hagel, I'm careful when I write about Hagel because I don't want to sound like I'm in favor of him. I've been very critical of him, and I've also been very critical of libertarians who have thought he would be a savior because while he was in office, he's gone along with everything that Obama has said. He's never at least publicly stood up to the president, which he couldn't anyway. He's an employee of the president. But the point about this is that I think it got so bad in the administration that someone like Hagel, unlike Susan Rice and all of these others, has had extensive military experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think he won 2 Purple Hearts in Vietnam, so he knows what the troops that are being asked to undertake these adventures. He knows what's required of them.
Yeah.
And I think he raised this issue in October. He sent a letter to Susan Rice saying you need to clarify your policy toward Assad because you're bombing the people that Assad is fighting while still claiming that you want to take out Assad.
Yeah.
So what is it? What's the story here?
Yeah. Which side are you on?
Exactly, and I think and the answer is the U.S. wants to be on both sides at the same time, and it's the contradiction in that position is simply untenable. And I think Hagel is trying to point that out as a person who understands what's required to go to war. And I think what you have is this political leadership in the National Security Council who want to get things done, but they have absolutely no understanding of how a military strategy works.
Mm-hmm.
So they're pie in the sky. I coined the term. I think I like it. Obama's violent dreamers.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah.
This is what these people are. So I think there was that tension there, and I think that that is sort of what opened the door for Hagel to leave. What will happen next? I suspect the U.S. will increase its moves to oust Assad after Hagel is gone. There won't be anyone there who is going to tell them they need to sit back and think this over. And there was actually this week, just a couple of days ago, an article that appeared in the Voice of America. So, it's approved by the American regime about how they're stepping up training of the so-called Syrian rebels. And now they're going to allow more overtly Islamist insurgent groups to benefit from training. And this is taking place in Saudi Arabia, and it's being funded by Qatar. So clearly the U.S. is ramping up. The focus is on Assad. So they're going to take out the one force on the ground that actually is fighting ISIS.
That's incredible. Well, it seems, though, also, Daniel, though, that this fits into the bigger geopolitical picture against Russia, does it not?
Well, certainly Russia has been close with Syria. They've been allied with Syria, and I think this will, taking out Russia's ally in the region will be very pleasing to Turkey, to Saudi Arabia, to Qatar, to Israel, to the neocons back home. They all want Assad to go. So I think they're certainly, and the U.S. wants to give Russia a black eye wherever it can. And that would certainly be the case if they were able to do this overthrow in Syria, which I think they're going to ramp up with the next couple of months.
Well, one thing I mean, to me, the politics of the Middle East is so complicated. It's so messed up. But one thing I can't quite understand, maybe you can help me understand this, Daniel, is why would Israel want to see the Syrian regime change? Because Syria is one of the few let's say, one of the few secular Islamic states left. Why it seems to me everything that's happening is bringing about a more violent, a more hostile, more angry Islam.
Yeah.
All the time, wherever we go. And why would that be in Israel's interest, for goodness sakes?
Well, I think just like we have neocons here in the U.S., I think there are neocons and warhawks in Israel. And
yeah.
I think the neocon impulse is to use violence first and to believe that violence can solve problems and war can solve problems, instead of what you and I and your listeners know, which is that it often creates more problems than it solves.
No, it seems to.
I think what Israel, what the hawks, what the neocons in Israel, and also their allies here in the U.S. Believe is that ISIS does not attack Israel or Israeli interests. They have no interest in fighting Israel.
Mm-hmm.
They're first on their list of people they want to kill are the people that they consider to be infidels within Islam. So I think if I'm looking back with neocon eyes, I'm saying, hey, here's a Muslim group that wants to go out and kill a bunch more Muslims. This seems like a win-win for us.
Mm-hmm.
So
I see.
Let's
Okay.
sit back and let them have at it.
Okay.
Knock themselves out, and that's exactly what the U.S. did in the Iran-Iraq War, if you remember. First we supported one side, and when that side was And when the other side was almost down and out, then we switched our support to the other. We wanted to keep them fighting until they were both destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very cynical ploy.
So do you think, so the idea then is to keep those countries that are closest to us right now? Of course, the history of the Middle East is countries that we thought were our really good friends turn out to be enemies in the future. And that seems to be what's happened all along. But some of those countries you name, like Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Israel, those are the countries I guess we feel, the neocons at least, feel most comfortable with. And so we're trying to build up an alliance with those and solidify our power in the region that way.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. For different reasons, the U.S. has a close relationship with each of these countries. Turkey is in NATO. A lot of the Americans, neocons, interventionists, and others feel like we have a very special bond with Israel, which is fine. But their policies that they believe are helping Israel are actually creating more enemies for Israel and making things more difficult for them in the region.
Yeah.
Just that's how they feel about, the neocons feel about U.S. policy too. All of the things they think are going to help us have actually made things so much worse. So,
well, it seems as though what we do is align ourselves with a few powerful people in these countries. I mean, for example, in Saudi Arabia, I don't think that, I mean, it's my belief, Daniel, that it's not, there's not unified, necessarily unanimous support in Saudi Arabia for the United States.
No, I think it's the people versus the leaders, but it's such a total dictatorship in Saudi Arabia that that it will be very difficult for people to rise up. Look how brutally they suppress the Shia minority there. Look how brutally they suppress Christians there. But the U.S. turns a blind eye to all that because they want to be able to use Saudi Arabia to its own ends.
Well, Daniel, as we discontinue or we conclude our discussion this week, what do you think we should be looking for at going forward next week? What are some of the things that you think are most potentially problematic?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see who comes in as the next Secretary of Defense. There was a lot of buzz later in the week, a couple of days ago, that it would be Michelle Flournoy, who is the neocons neocon. She's a Democrat Party neocon, and she's a lot of money to the Democrats. I think the neocons are itching to go back to the Democratic Party. Bill Kristol has already said that he's all for Hillary, so I think they're itching to go back there, and I think this might signal a shift. She did pull out of it, but I think it'll be interesting to see who Obama chooses. Now it looks like it may be someone from the lower echelons, the second or third tier, but it'll still remain very interesting to see who he picks and why, because I think that'll signal what he intends to do for the last year of his administration.
Well, that's interesting because if he picks some of these really strong neocons, I have to wonder to what extent that will affect the Democratic Party. I don't know if Dennis Kucinich is correct or not, but another piece on the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity headlines, Dennis Kucinich says that support for war and national security state is the reason the Democrats lost so many votes in the election, the last election.
Yes, absolutely.
So it might affect the sort of the left or the more peace-orientated members of the Democratic Party, but perhaps gather more so-called mainstream, middle-of-the-road Americans. I think that's oversimplification, but
I think you're right. And I think the neocons are overjoyed at the results of the elections a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. There's no indication in polls, however, that Americans voted for Republicans because they wanted more war. But the neocons want to be able to interpret the results to benefit them. And McCain on his Twitter account today was drawing everyone's attention to an article in the Wall Street Journal about how the interventionist Republicans are now on the rise. This is there was a brief flirtation with people like Ron Paul and this wing of the party, but that's all gone.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be interesting. And I think if you see, I don't know if you noticed this last week, Jay, but Jim Webb, the former senator from Virginia, announced that he's forming an exploratory committee to run for the president, and that could really mix things up in the Democratic Party. This is a conservative Democrat with a pretty strong anti-war record and a very strong military record, who was opposed to Libya, opposed to Iraq, and I think if he comes in as the anti-Hillary, it could make things quite interesting. And you never know, as you point out, if there is a stronger sentiment toward non-interventionism, you could see him or someone like him who chooses to embrace that really get some traction.
Yeah, well, we'll keep our eyes on that, and we'll look forward to talking to you again next Friday, Daniel, for another update on some of the more important issues that are taking place geopolitically. I want to thank you again for being with us.
Thank you so much, Jay.
Okay, folks, well, we'll be back next week for another segment of Foreign Policy Week in Review with Daniel McAdams. Thanks for listening.